Sarah stared defiantly at the HOA officials, rain cascading off the gleaming tanks behind her. My rainwater system isn't going anywhere. It's the future, and I'm not backing down. As the HOA president's face twisted with rage, Sarah knew this was only the beginning of an all-out war. Sarah wiped the sweat from her brow, admiring the sleek rainwater tanks she'd installed in her backyard. After months of research and installation, she finally had a sustainable water source independent of the drought-ridden municipal supply. Her neighbors had scoffed at the eyesore, but Sarah knew her investment would pay off. What Sarah didn't expect was the angry knock at her door the very next day. She opened it to find the entire HOA board, led by the scowling President Matthews. "Mrs. Wilkins, we've received complaints about those hideous tanks in your yard," Matthews sneered. "They're in direct violation of our community guidelines. You have 30 days to remove them." Sarah stood her ground. "The tanks collect rainwater to reduce my family's water usage. They're good for the environment and my budget." "I don't care about your environmental nonsense," Matthews spat. "They're unsightly, and they're coming down. End of discussion." As the board members nodded in agreement, Sarah felt her blood boil. "This is my property, and I have every right to install these systems. You can't just bully me into removing them." Matthews leaned in, his eyes narrowed. "Oh, we can, and we will. You have 30 days, or we'll take legal action. Good day, Mrs. Wilkins." Sarah watched in stunned silence as the board members marched back to their waiting cars. She knew this was only the beginning of a fight she was determined to win. That night, Sarah pored over the HOA's guidelines, searching for any loopholes. To her dismay, the language was airtight. No unsightly structures were permitted. But as she dug deeper, she stumbled upon a glimmer of hope. The county had recently passed legislation encouraging the use of rainwater harvesting systems to combat the ongoing drought. Sarah's research revealed that the county guidelines superseded the HOA's outdated rules. With a newfound sense of determination, she began drafting her plan of attack. The next morning, Sarah marched into the county offices, armed with her research and a steely resolve. "I need to speak to someone about my HOA's attempts to force me to remove my rainwater tanks," she declared. The clerk eyed her warily. "Ma'am, the HOA usually has the final say on these matters. What makes your case different?" Sarah launched into a detailed explanation, citing the county's own guidelines and the environmental benefits of her system. As the clerk listened, his expression shifted from skepticism to intrigue. "You know, you may have a point," he mused. "Let me see what I can do." Sarah held her breath as the clerk disappeared into the back office. When he returned, a triumphant smile spread across his face. "Mrs. Wilkins, the county is prepared to back you on this one. We'll be sending a delegation to your HOA to discuss the new legislation and your right to keep those tanks. Looks like you found a loophole, and a model for the rest of the county." As Sarah left the office, a sense of elation and relief washed over her. The battle had just begun, but she knew she had the law on her side. The HOA's days of bullying were numbered. Sarah paced nervously as she waited for the county delegation to arrive at the HOA meeting. President Matthews had reluctantly agreed to the meeting after receiving the county's strongly worded letter, but Sarah could sense the impending confrontation. When the delegation finally entered the room, Matthews' face twisted with barely contained fury. "What is the meaning of this?" He spat. "My community has rules, and I won't have the county interfering." The county representative, a stern-faced woman named Ms. Alvarez, stood her ground. "Mr. Matthews, we're here to discuss the recent legislation on rainwater harvesting systems. Mrs. Wilkins has made us aware of your attempt to force her to remove her perfectly legal and environmentally friendly setup." Matthews scoffed. "That eyesore is a blight on our community. It doesn't matter what the county says. It goes against our guidelines." "Actually, Mr. Matthews, that's where you're mistaken," Ms. Alvarez replied coolly. The county's new guidelines supersede your outdated HOA rules. Mrs. Wilkins has every right to keep her rainwater tanks on her property. The HOA board members erupted in outraged murmurs, but Ms. Alvarez raised a hand. Furthermore, the county is prepared to offer incentives and subsidies to any homeowners who install similar systems. We see this as a model for sustainable water usage that we'd like to encourage throughout the region. Sarah watched with barely contained glee as Matthew's face turned an unflattering shade of puce. This is an outrage. You can't just come in here and tell us what to do on our own private property. Actually, we can, Ms. Alvarez said calmly, and we will. Mrs. Wilkins, you have our full support. As for the rest of you, I suggest you familiarize yourselves with the new county guidelines. Good day. As the delegation filed out, the HOA board erupted in furious shouts. Matthews slammed his fist on the table, his face contorted with rage. This isn't over, Mrs. Wilkins. I will not be made a fool of in my own community. Sarah met his gaze defiantly. It's already over, Mr. Matthews. The county has spoken, and I'm not going anywhere. You can try all you want, but you'll never bully me into submission. With that, she turned and walked out, her head held high. The battle lines had been drawn, and Sarah was ready for the fight of her life. The HOA meeting had descended into chaos, with board members shouting and gesticulating wildly. Sarah watched from the sidelines, a grim smile playing on her lips. She knew this was only the beginning of the battle, but for now, the victory was hers. As she made her way home, Sarah's mind raced with the possibilities. With the county's backing, she could not only keep her rainwater system, but also inspire her neighbors to follow suit. The drought had been weighing heavily on everyone's minds, and Sarah's small-scale solution could be the spark that ignited a larger movement. When she arrived home, Sarah found her husband, Mark, waiting anxiously on the porch. I just heard what happened at the meeting, he said, enveloping her in a tight hug. Are you okay? Sarah nodded, a determined glint in her eye. I'm more than okay, Mark. This is just the start. With the county on our side, we can show the HOA that their outdated rules have no place in a sustainable future. Mark's brow furrowed. I know how much this means to you, but are you sure you want to pick a fight with the HOA? They're a powerful group, and they won't take this lying down. I'm well aware of that, Sarah replied, her voice steady. But I'm not backing down. This is about more than just our rainwater tanks. It's about standing up to the kind of bullying and narrow-mindedness that's been holding our community back. Mark studied her face, then nodded slowly. All right then. I'm with you, whatever happens. But please, be careful. I don't want to see you get hurt. Sarah squeezed his hand, a fierce determination burning in her eyes. I'll be fine, Mark. This is the fight of our lives, and I'm not going to let the HOA win. That night, as Sarah pored over the county's new guidelines and drafted a plan of action, she couldn't help but feel a surge of excitement. She knew the road ahead would be tough, but she was more than ready to take on the HOA and their outdated ways. The next morning, Sarah set to work, reaching out to her neighbors and sharing the news of the county's support. To her surprise, many of them were intrigued by the prospect of installing their own rainwater systems. Sarah seized the opportunity, offering to help them navigate the process and connect them with the county's resources. As word spread through the community, Sarah's efforts began to bear fruit. Slowly but surely, her neighbors started to follow her lead, and soon, the once derided rainwater tanks became a common sight in the neighborhood. The HOA, however, remained steadfast in their opposition. Sarah knew it was only a matter of time before they struck back, and she braced herself for the inevitable confrontation. The weeks that followed were a flurry of activity as Sarah's neighbors joined the rainwater revolution. One by one, they began installing their own tanks, fueled by the county's incentives and Sarah's infectious enthusiasm. The HOA, however, remained steadfast in their opposition. President Matthews had made it clear that he would do everything in his power to shut down Sarah's unsightly system, and he quickly set his sights on her newfound allies. It started with subtle threats and intimidation tactics. Neighbors reported receiving ominous letters from the HOA, warning them of potential fines and legal action if they didn't remove their tanks. Some even found their property mysteriously vandalized, with their prized installations damaged or destroyed. Sarah watched in horror as her hard-won progress began to unravel. She knew she had to act quickly, so she organized a meeting with the county officials to discuss the escalating situation. "We're doing everything we can to support you and your neighbors, Mrs. Wilkins," Ms. Alvarez said, her brow furrowed with concern. "But the HOA seems intent on undermining our efforts at every turn." Sarah nodded grimly. "I was afraid of that. They're not going to back down without a fight, and they're willing to stoop to some pretty underhanded tactics to get their way. Well, we're not going to let them intimidate us," Ms. Alvarez declared. "The county is prepared to take legal action against the HOA if they continue to harass your neighbors. We'll make it clear that any attempts to interfere with these rainwater systems will be met with severe consequences." Sarah exhaled a sigh of relief. "Thank you, Ms. Alvarez. I knew I could count on the county's support. But I'm worried about my neighbors. They're vulnerable, and the HOA is targeting them directly." "We understand your concern," Ms. Alvarez assured her. "That's why we're going to provide additional security and legal resources to protect the homeowners who have installed these systems. The county is committed to seeing this through, no matter how much the HOA tries to push back." As Sarah left the meeting, a renewed sense of determination filled her. The HOA might have thought they could bully her and her neighbors into submission, but they were sorely mistaken. With the county on their side, Sarah knew they were a force to be reckoned with. Back in her neighborhood, Sarah wasted no time in rallying her fellow rainwater enthusiasts. She shared the news of the county's support and urged them to stand firm against the HOA's intimidation tactics. "We've come too far to back down now," she told them, her eyes blazing with conviction. "The HOA may think they can scare us, but we have the law on our side. Together, we can show them that this community is ready to embrace a sustainable future." As her neighbors nodded in agreement, Sarah felt a surge of pride. The battle lines had been drawn, and she was more determined than ever to emerge victorious. The HOA's campaign of intimidation only seemed to embolden Sarah and her neighbors. Fueled by the county's unwavering support, they stood their ground, refusing to be cowed by the HOA's threats. One by one, the homeowners who had installed rainwater systems began to speak out, sharing their stories and the benefits they were already seeing. Word spread through the community, and soon, a growing number of residents were clamoring to join the movement. President Matthews, however, was not about to give up without a fight. Incensed by the county's interference and the defiance of his own neighbors, he began to plot his next move. One evening, as Sarah was tending to her meticulously maintained rainwater tanks, she heard the familiar sound of a car pulling into her driveway. Stepping out of the house, she found herself face to face with Matthews and a small contingent of HOA board members. "Mrs. Wilkins," Matthews growled, his eyes narrowed with malice, "I thought I made it clear that those tanks were unacceptable in our community." Sarah stood her ground, her chin lifted defiantly. "And I thought I made it clear that the county has my back on this. You're wasting your time, Matthews." "We'll see about that," the HOA president sneered. "I have a court order here that says those tanks are coming down, whether you like it or not." Sarah's blood ran cold as Matthews waved the document in her face. "You can't do this," she protested. The county be damned," Matthews interrupted. "This is my community, and I'll be damned if I let a bunch of tree-hugging upstarts ruin it." Before Sarah could react, the HOA members surged forward, wielding sledgehammers and other tools. She watched in horror as they began to systematically dismantle her carefully constructed rainwater system, ignoring her desperate pleas. "Stop. You can't do this, she cried, but her words fell on deaf ears. The men worked with ruthless efficiency, reducing her beloved tanks to a pile of twisted metal and shattered plastic. As the last of the tanks crumbled, Sarah felt her heart sink. She had been so close to victory, only to have it snatched away by the arrogance and vindictiveness of the HOA. Tears of frustration and anger streamed down her face as she realized that the battle was far from over. Turning to Matthews, she fixed him with a steely gaze. "This isn't over, you bastard. I'll make you regret the day you crossed me." The HOA president merely chuckled, a smug expression on his face. "We'll see about that, Mrs. Wilkins. We'll see." As the HOA members piled back into their cars and drove off, Sarah sank to her knees amidst the ruins of her rainwater system. She had thought she was winning, but now she knew that the real fight was just beginning. Sarah's heart pounded as she watched the HOA members drive away, leaving the shattered remains of her rainwater system in their wake. She had been so close to victory, only to have it snatched away by the ruthless machinations of President Matthews and his cronies. Wiping the tears from her eyes, Sarah steeled herself and marched into the house, determined to find a way to fight back. She knew the county had promised to support her, but in the face of the HOA's underhanded tactics, she couldn't afford to wait for their intervention. Sitting at her kitchen table, Sarah began to furiously draft a plan of action. She would need to move quickly, before the HOA could consolidate their victory and intimidate the rest of the neighborhood into submission. First, she reached out to her neighbors, rallying them to join her in a united front against the HOA. She knew that strength in numbers would be crucial in this battle, and she was determined to harness the growing momentum of the rainwater movement. "They've gone too far this time," Sarah told her neighbors, her voice trembling with a mixture of anger and resolve. "We can't let them get away with this. We have to fight back, and we have to do it together." To her relief, her neighbors responded with a resounding show of support. One by one, they pledged their commitment to the cause, vowing to stand by Sarah and continue the fight for their right to use rainwater systems. With her allies secured, Sarah turned her attention to the legal front. She knew she would need to act quickly before the HOA could further cement their position. Reaching out to the county, she pleaded for their immediate intervention, emphasizing the urgency of the situation. "They've destroyed my system, and I'm sure they're not going to stop there," Sarah told Ms. Alvarez, the county representative. "We need your help to stop them before they can do any more damage." Ms. Alvarez's brow furrowed with concern. "I understand your frustration, Mrs. Wilkins. This is a clear violation of the county's guidelines, and we won't stand for it. I'll have our legal team file an injunction against the HOA immediately." Sarah exhaled a sigh of relief, her tension easing slightly. "Thank you, Ms. Alvarez. I know we can count on the county's support. This fight isn't over yet." As the county's legal machinery began to grind into motion, Sarah turned her attention to her neighbors once more. She knew that the HOA would be emboldened by their recent victory, and she needed to ensure that her community remained united and resolute in the face of their aggression. "We're not going to let them win," Sarah told her neighbors, her voice filled with determination. "Together, we're going to show them that this community belongs to all of us, not just their narrow-minded, self-serving agenda." The gathered residents erupted into applause, their faces alight with a newfound sense of purpose. Sarah smiled, feeling a surge of pride and hope. The battle lines had been drawn, and she was more determined than ever to emerge victorious. The county's swift legal action came as a much-needed boost to Sarah and her fellow rainwater advocates. Within days, an injunction was issued, preventing the HOA from taking any further action against the homeowners who had installed rainwater systems. President Matthews, however, was not one to be easily deterred. Furious at the county's intervention, he doubled down on his efforts to undermine the growing movement. "This isn't over," he snarled at the next HOA meeting, his face contorted with rage. "We're going to fight this tooth and nail, and we're going to win. No bunch of tree-hugging hippies is going to tell us what to do in our own community. The other board members murmured their assent, their expressions grim and determined. Sarah knew that they were prepared to pull out all the stops to maintain their grip on the neighborhood. Undaunted, Sarah and her neighbors continued to work closely with the county, strategizing their next moves. They knew that the HOA would stop at nothing to regain control, and they needed to be one step ahead. "We're going to need to be proactive," Ms. Alvarez advised, her brow furrowed with concern. "The HOA is clearly not going to back down, and they're going to keep looking for ways to undermine your progress." Sarah nodded, her mind racing with ideas. "We need to make it clear to the entire community that the county is on our side. We need to show them that this isn't just about a few rainwater tanks, it's about the future of our neighborhood." With renewed determination, Sarah and her neighbors launched a grassroots campaign to educate their fellow residents about the benefits of rainwater harvesting and the county's support for their efforts. They organized town hall meetings, distributed informational flyers, and even enlisted the help of local media outlets to spread the word. The response was overwhelming. As more and more homeowners learned about the environmental and financial advantages of rainwater systems, they began to see the HOA's resistance in a new light. Suddenly, the once powerful organization found itself facing a growing wave of public opposition. President Matthews, sensing the tide turning against him, grew increasingly desperate. He lashed out at Sarah and her allies, resorting to even more underhanded tactics to try and regain control. "This is our community, and we won't let you dictate how we live," he snarled at a tense community meeting. "If you think we're going to roll over and let you win, you've got another thing coming." But Sarah refused to be cowed. "This isn't about you or your precious HOA, Matthews," she retorted, her voice steady and unwavering. "It's about the future of our neighborhood and the kind of community we want to live in, and we're not going to let you stand in our way." As the meeting erupted into a heated debate, Sarah knew that the final battle was drawing near. The stakes had never been higher, and she was determined to emerge victorious. The tension in the community had reached a fever pitch as the showdown between the rainwater advocates and the HOA leadership drew to a climax. President Matthews, his face etched with desperation, knew that he was fighting a losing battle. Despite his best efforts to intimidate and undermine the growing movement, the residents of the neighborhood had rallied behind Sarah and her vision for a more sustainable future. The county's unwavering support had been a crucial factor, providing the legal and infrastructural backing needed to counter the HOA's aggressive tactics. As the final community meeting commenced, an uneasy hush fell over the room. Matthews stood before the gathered crowd, his hands trembling slightly. "This has gone on long enough," he began, his voice wavering. "It's time for this nonsense to end. The HOA has spoken, and those rainwater tanks are coming down, whether you like it or not." A murmur of protest rippled through the audience, but Matthews raised a hand, silencing them. "We're not going to be bullied by the county or a bunch of misguided homeowners," he continued, his eyes narrowing. "This is our community, and we're going to run it the way we see fit." But before he could say another word, Sarah stepped forward, her expression resolute. "No, Matthews. This is our community, not just yours. We've made our voices heard, and the county has backed us up every step of the way. Your outdated rules and your attempts to strong-arm us are over." The crowd erupted into cheers and applause, their support for Sarah palpable. Matthew's face flushed with fury, but he remained silent, his grip on the podium tightening. "The county has issued a new set of guidelines that supersede your HOA rules," Sarah continued, her voice ringing with authority. "Rainwater harvesting is now not only legal, but encouraged throughout the region. And we, the residents of this community, have chosen to embrace that future." As the crowd erupted into renewed cheers, Matthew's shoulders slumped in defeat. He knew that the battle was lost, and that his days of unchecked power were over. "This isn't over, Wilkins," he spat, his eyes narrowed with bitter resentment. You may have won this round, but I'll be watching. One day, you'll slip up, and I'll be there to make you pay." Sarah regarded him coolly, unfazed by his threats. "We'll be ready, Matthews. And if you try anything, the county will be there to back us up. This community belongs to all us now, not just the HOA." With that, she turned and walked away, the crowd parting to let her pass. As she made her way home, she couldn't help but feel a sense of triumph. The long battle had been won, and her rainwater tanks had become a model for the entire county. As for President Matthews and the HOA, their days of unchallenged control were over. The residents of the community had spoken, and they had chosen a future of sustainability and progress, a future that Sarah and her allies had fought so hard to achieve.